How's it going, family? Powerful I am. You got 50 the Mystic. Still carrying on. We just entered the book of Exodus. Starting with Exodus 20, we're going over the 10 commandments. Today we get into Exodus 20, verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And as we break it down, it's a declaration of identity, power, and liberation. This verse represents the moment the divine establishes the foundation of all spiritual authority, not through fear, but through remembrance. Egypt symbolizes the state of inner bondage, the mental patterns, emotional prisons, generational wounds, and survival conditions that keep a person trapped. The house of bondage represents the internal structure that kept that slavery in place, the habits, beliefs, attachments, and fears that held the soul captive. And nowadays, a lot of people are still in bondage, but the bondage is about more than chains. It's spiritual bondage as well. The houses of bondage, man, it's powerful. When God says, I brought you out, it is a reminder that liberation is never self-produced. It is initiated by a higher force within you, the force that refuses to let you die in a place you were never meant to stay. Every one of us has that thing that knows there's greater out there for all of us. We just need to tap into the greatness within us. Egypt becomes very internal or external environment that suppresses your own identity. It is the emotional Egypt of unhealed pain, the psychological Egypt of low self-worth, the generational Egypt of inherited dysfunction, the spiritual Egypt of confusion, or the relational Egypt of toxic connections. It is the Egypt, for some, we might call it slavery, might call it apartheid, for example, in South Africa, where people still don't understand or want to admit the psychological damage that they did to people and say, just get over it. No, you can't. When you look at certain people, there's things like the Holocaust. People still don't get over that. We have Anglo-Boer wars here of Boers and the English fighting. Oh, it happened nearly almost over 100 years ago. But still they're not over it. But people must get over things that just happened recently. The irony and the hypocrisy. God identifying himself as the one who brought you out symbolizes that your freedom was not an accident. Something higher intervened, something inside you awakened, something refused to let you continue living small. This verse is about spiritual ownership. God calls himself your God, meaning the force that liberated you is now the force that guides you. I like personalizing God, especially for myself. I think even of the story when Jesus was at the cross. He wasn't screaming out to, our God, our God. He was screaming out to, my God, why have you forsaken me? Liberation establishes relationship. Relationship establishes responsibility. This scripture is the moment your higher self declares you belong to truth now. Not your wounds, you belong to freedom, not your history. You belong to divine alignment, not the structures that once imprisoned you. Because it reflects a found inner event within the architecture of the mind and the desire of the human body itself. When God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It mirrors the psychological and neurological process of breaking out of long-standing patterns of fear, trauma, and limitation. Egypt represents the limbic prison, the emotional brain locked in survival mode. The house of bondage represents the internal neural loops that keep you stuck. Repetitive thought cycles. You're always stressing about how you're going to make ends meet, and for some reason it never goes away. The stress responses. The way you react when you start lashing out at people when you are under pressure. And conditioned beliefs formed through years of pressure, hurt, and habit. Many of us have these emotional wounds, especially coming through the wounds of religion a lot of times, where a lot of us are being damaged and harmed. And it's been flowing for generations. When God identifies himself as the one who brings you out, it parallels the moment your higher consciousness overrides these old patterns and leads you into a regulated and liberated state. In brain anatomy, this shift mirrors the transition from limbic dominance to prefrontal activation. The limbic system holds fear, hypervigilance, and emotional memory, while the prefrontal cortex governs clarity, discipline, purpose, and decision making. Liberation requires this shift. A person cannot leave their inner Egypt while the emotional brain still rules their choices. Divine intervention symbolizes the activation of higher neural pathways that were previously dormant due to stress, trauma, or conditioning. This liberation also aligns with breath and nervous system regulation. Bondage constricts the body, tightening the chest, shortening the breath, and keeping the vagus nerve locked in fight or flight. Divine release mirrors the moment the system resets, the breath deepens, the muscles relax, and inner body stabilizes. The statement, I brought you out, is the inner architecture awakening from your years of tension. In the human system, this is the shift from being ruled by trauma to being guided by consciousness. It is the moment your inner design rises to its true function overall. Because this mirrors one of the most consistent patterns seen in nature and cosmic law, the movement from confinement to expansion, from stagnation to flow, from restriction to liberation. When God declares, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, it reflects the same principle embedded in every natural process. Nothing in nature is designed to remain trapped. Rivers break through rock over time. Seeds push through soil. Caterpillars transform and break out of the cocoon. Even stars collapse only to release unimaginable light. Cosmic law teaches that every living thing is engineered for evolution and movement. Egypt symbolizes the natural law of compression. Seasons of compression exist to push life into its next form. Just as seeds require darkness before sprouting, the house of bondage symbolizes unnatural stagnation, the kind of confinement where growth has ceased and the system begins to deteriorate. In nature, when an organism remains in a place that no longer supports its growth, the ecosystem forces transition, either through pressure, decay, disruption, or external intervention. In this verse, divine intervention represents the force of nature breaking what cannot continue. This verse aligns with the law of vibration and the law of expansion. High vibrations cannot remain trapped in low environments without creating tension. When a soul evolves, the environment that once held it becomes too small. Just as a snake sheds its skin or a hermit crab abandons a shell that can no longer contain it. The declaration, I brought you out, aligns with the cosmic principle that life always pulls you towards your next level, even when you resist. The higher force, if you allow it to flow through you, will take you to that next level. Therefore, this reveals that liberation is not only spiritual, it is natural. It demands that you rise, evolve, and move into environments that match your true frequency. It becomes a direct and practical reminder that every person has an Egypt, and every person has a God-given exit. When God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, teaches that your liberation did not begin with your strength. It began with your awakening. You did not feel free yourself from your lowest seasons, your destructive cycles, or your painful environments. Something high inside you rose up and refused to let your story end there. This means you must stop giving your past credit for your survival. It was your inner divine guidance that led you out of this wilderness. This verse teaches that bondage is not only physical, it is mental, emotional, relational, and behavioral. Egypt may be an unhealthy relationship you finally walked away from, a toxic habit you broke, a fear you confronted, a depressive environment or a mindset that once imprisoned you. Think of it like self-limiting beliefs that you impose upon yourself. Think about it thinking that poverty is okay. That is not okay at all. Think of it. Think of it of someone you lost and that period you thought you would never get out of that dark place. But somehow you did. Because we need to understand, it's bad. We need to let God deliver us out of this. Let your higher self, your higher consciousness get you out of these dark places. Release control at times. I know you always want to be in control of everything. But sometimes your strength is just not enough. The key practical insight is this: if God brought you out, then you are meant to return. Too many people are physically free but emotionally tied to the same patterns that once enslaved them. This calls you to close the door behind you, because this is a practical lesson in identity itself. Before giving the commandments, God reminds them who freed them. In your life, this means you must anchor yourself in truth of who guided your journey, not in the voices that try to limit you. When you forget who brought you out, you lose direction. When you remember, you walk with conviction. Finally, this verse teaches responsibility. Freedom is not the end, it is the beginning. Once you leave your Egypt, you must build new habits, new standards, and new boundaries that match your liberated identity. This is how you honor the one who brought you out. And now, in Exodus 20 verse 3, we start getting into the nitty gritty now. Probably the parts you've all been waiting for. Exodus 20 verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Loved by pastors in the church, this one. We'll delve a bit deeper into it in the next segment. Till next time, family. Stay well.